We now find that 85% of individual investors are interested in sustainable investing. Among millennials, the interest is even stronger. One of the big trends in sustainable investing is data and the ability to understand how sustainable your investments are. By taking that information into account, investors can make better decisions for the long term. Sustainability is not about one number. It's about variables like water usage, data privacy, consumer trust, diversity, land use, and conservation. All types of investors are now considering this in their investment decisions. This is not niche. 1 in $4 globally is following some form of sustainable investing. With sustainable investing at this scale, there's power to change the markets and have an impact on the issues investors care about most. I am Courtney Thompson, and we are Morgan Stanley.
Jordan is soul for the mornings. Choose to be grateful. The tune of Georgia football, where books meet Black Mecca. Should you move to Canada? Grasping French, à la fois, tragedy in the Middle East, trumpet and freedom, and spirit, thought, and jazz. The mystery of that Basquiat, a shrimp Creole for our time, that healing saxophone thing, mixing it up Brazilian style. What feelings sound like? Finding a voice far away.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the New York Times' Climate Forward Conversations. Just a few weeks ago, we launched the first of our in-person climate events here in London, with speakers from the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, to Angelique Kidjo. We heard about the impacts of climate change and the tensions around how to address challenges of life on a warming planet. This series includes the online episode you're watching today, as well as hybrid events coming up in New York City and Sharm el-Sheikh, in the lead up to and alongside COP27. You can find out more at nytimes.com/climate forward events. I'm Rona Perry, and I'm so excited for all of you who are joining us again as part of this online series. And welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. It would be great to see in the chat where you're watching from. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Morgan Stanley, for making today's episode possible. Today, Vanessa Friedman, the fashion director and chief fashion critic for the New York Times, will be having a conversation with the speakers about the power of influence in the world of fashion, and increasingly in the transition to responsible fashion. Often cultural preferences, hyperconsumption, marketing, and advertising complicate the ability for sustainable solutions to be adopted en masse. We have asked the audience what they think about responsible fashion and the sustainable trends that are here to stay. This is what they had to say.
If we are still taking rather than giving back, in many forms from natural resources, well-being to distribution of wealth, we are not behaving in a responsible way. Extended producer responsibility, regenerative farming, and CEO's climate action knowledge can all help fashion to give back. Defining a personal style beyond the trend cycle, consuming less, and promoting a structural understanding of our dominant extractive fashion model, predicated on the knowledge that conscious consumerism alone, although important, will not save us. What we can't do is villainize affordable clothing, because people need affordable clothing. What we do need is to recognize that there cannot be any space for disposable clothing. The younger generation don't see newness as inherently important for a product. Any trend that helps raise awareness around climate action and can also lead to long-lasting behavioral change will hopefully be here to stay. However, our challenge is not to sustain, but to adapt our practices to degrowth and support the well-being economy. Yes, circular eco-fashion. I believe that, yes. Even if consumers are buying up cheap stuff on Shein, the new creative and young entrepreneurs are finding solutions. Upcycling is becoming a thing, and it is improving in look, creativity, and production. It will be the norm.
I'm looking forward to learning more about how influencers and consumers can accelerate the transformation of the fashion industry. I really hope you enjoy the discussion. Now, over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Rona, and thank you to the audience for their thoughtful submissions on the power of influence in the shift toward more responsible fashion. It's an enormous pleasure to be here with an audience from around the world. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm Vanessa Friedman, the fashion director of the New York Times, and I am coming to you from the New York Times offices in New York City. I am also sitting on a twirly chair, so if I start to move, please bear with me. I'm really excited about the conversation we're about to have. It's been fascinating to me to watch the discussion about fashion and climate change develop and see how more and more brands are taking responsibility for their own role in the environmental crisis. But sometimes I feel like we focus too much on the beginning of life, on how garments are made, materials, agriculture, and so on, and not enough on the choices that we, as consumers, can make to influence and promote change and best behavior. The answer is not, after all, as simple as just do better, right? It has to do with culture, with history, with learned behavior, economics, and, let's be honest, peer pressure. Which is why I am so pleased to be able to introduce 3 speakers who know as much about these issues as anyone I have ever met. Shaway Yeh, founder and consultant of yehyehyeh, a Shanghai-based agency that develops environmentally and socially responsible strategies for brands across Asia. Hi, Shaway. How are you?
Hi, Vanessa. Very happy to be joining these conversations.
Where are you?
Well, I'm currently in Taipei, Taiwan, which is my hometown. And I just arrived here a few days ago, so I'm still in quarantine hotel.
Great. Next, we have Brett Staniland, model, academic, and sustainable fashion advocate. And also, let me add, the man who got Love Island UK to swap its fast fashion sponsor for eBay. Welcome, Brett. Where are you?
Hi, Vanessa. Nice to see you again. I'm currently in Canada, but flying back to London tomorrow, so mentally preparing myself for the heat there.
Right. And finally, we have Chloe Asaam, Programs Manager of the OR Foundation, which aims to raise awareness around the fashion waste crisis, specifically in Ghana's capital, Accra, where 15 million used garments arrive every week from the UK, Europe, North America, and Australia. Hello, Chloe.
Hi, Vanessa.
Are you in Accra?
Yes, I'm currently in Accra. I'm speaking to you from our No More Fast Fashion Lab.
And how are things there?
Good. Actually, weirdly chilly, to be honest. The weather has been weird the last couple of days, but we're fine.
Well, I think the weird weather pattern is part of what we're all here to talk about.
Yeah.
Brett, let's start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with this whole movement to shift Love Island and why you wanted to take this on?
I guess it started when I was approached to do the show. The main thing that I was adamant to find out was the relationship with the fast fashion sponsor, because I know in the past, it's likely we get gifted clothes whilst we're there. And so when I got the contestant agreement and I worked out, how I could do the show but not support the fast fashion sponsor, and it was then I decided I could take my own clothes and just wear all my own clothes. But whilst I was there, it was insane how just the vast volume of clothing that was available to us. And then obviously coming off the show, all the contestants get approached by the brands to be influencers and be their ambassadors for the year and all that thing. So coming out, I wanted to kind of shed light on the whole relationship with fast fashion and reality TV, and use my platform more as a way to raise awareness and a way to help with education about those things, because the show has such a wide reach. It's a great audience to try and get hold of and, educate and help us all learn together about the really, really terrible practices of fast fashion. And then obviously that included a protest and some other activism work. It led the producers to make a different decision going into the season that's airing right now.
And Shaway, in your experience working with brands, how much could a decision like this for Love Island to shift away from fast fashion and move toward a company like eBay, how much of an effect would that have on a brand's business model?
Well, I think it will be really, really huge. Actually, I'm very surprised. First of all, excuse my ignorance. I never see Love Islands, but I can imagine because I met Brett in London. I know how popular it is. Everyone is talking about it. So I would imagine it's quite because, I think we'll be kind of accustomed to this world where brands sponsoring everything. They're sitting everything. They love to use the word sitting, which I hate it because what are you seated is actually not going to become a beautiful flower. It's going to become something quite horrible, but then they're sitting everywhere. And also because right now media is so integrated with the business of the brands, sponsorship. So it's very hard for them to do something otherwise and alternatively. So I think Brett's decision is actually quite brave and then kind of groundbreaking. So that's also why I'm very curious to participate in today's conversations.
Right. And Chloe, you clearly see this from the other side, right? Because you see the kind of mass of leftover clothing that ends up in Accra. So, why do you think that people on the front end are so blind to that, that kind of knock-on effect? And how do you make them understand that these are all connected?
We do our part in most of our work is creating awareness, but also a lot of our work is working with the continental community and showing how valuable it can be to recirculate garments and how there's a system already in Accra that is able to repurpose and upcycle and do a lot of magic with clothes that already exist. And so to hear that Brett was able to stand on his ground and say, like, let's just go to someone who already has like clothing, let's keep clothing recirculation was really, really, really inspiring for me, because I know that it can be really hard with peer pressure, with young people following trends and like going for things that are new and thinking about like how fast they can get the next thing, they can be a part of the culture. It was really refreshing to hear that Brett took a stand and like push back a bit. And I'm looking forward to hearing more influences. I like to do that because, to step up and understand the power that they have to try to change the culture that is ingrained in the global north to something that is more sustainable and more like holistic.
And Brett, I mean, clearly, your focus was on the UK, but Love Island is a program that has spin-offs in different countries. It's got influence around the world. So how much are you now working on, shifting the attitude of other reality programs, other series, other influencers outside of the UK?
Yeah, I think this is a really good starting point. Obviously, this is the first series. It's the first show that's actually made this change. But again, the UK version has another winter series coming up too, which will be a quick turnaround. I'd like to see how the relationship develops for that series. But as you say, I think Love Island's such a big show that it can set precedent for all the other reality shows, all the other just really popular television shows to then reconsider what their sponsorship is and what that marketing does to the general population. As Chloe was saying, it has a way to influence such a big demographic of people, but at the same time, it also influences them to, feel societal pressure and feel the pressure on Instagram that we need new things all the time. And literally whilst I was there, we had the conversation that, one of my friends had worn this 3 weeks ago on this show, and so they therefore couldn't wear it again. And I was like, that's just ridiculous. Like, we're people who have clothes, who wear them all the time. Like, just because you wore it once or you posted it to Instagram doesn't mean that it's old or that it's done. And so again, like Chloe and Shaway were saying, like, we need to build on that, the relationship we have with clothing, and whether that's connecting it with a person in Ghana and across the world, we need to change how people value and view clothing.
And Shaway, as someone who came from magazines and, has had experience both in the media and now with brands, what role does the media have in doing this? How much is it perpetrating this kind of constant cycle of newness and desire for newness? Because obviously, if you are, a publication, you want advertising, your advertisers want you to sell their stuff. Their stuff is new. There's pressure to push that idea. And, and how much can it really take a stance to help educate readers to say, like, hey, yeah, you can wear something 3 times. Like, the Duchess of Cambridge wears something again. Joe Biden wears something again. Where does that line lie?
Well, of course, there's so many different types of medias, right? But if you were looking about the traditional, conventional fashion media, I think they are kind of totally losing these battles, because honestly, I haven't looked at any fashion media for a while, and I recently just flipping through some, and then I'm kind of shocked. It's like it's still for the same kind of cliche, like the latest this, and then the green is the new black, sustainability new sexy, and then I'm like, why are we still hold on to the the value, which I was an editor, that was more than 10 years ago. And then while the whole world is so different, and then the customers and the consumers or the whole industry is all facing different changes, and it's still using the old framework to talk about new things. And then I think the problem with fashion media is a lot of times they see fashion just as an object and an image and a fantasy. And all this is kind of totally in contrary to what we need right now, because of course, fashion is an object, but it's object packed with creativity, packed with business, which I think a lot of fashion media really talk about. So we celebrate designer, we celebrate this business model, but I think they also forgot fashion is also packed about it's a whole value systems. And then when we talk about the value system, it's kind of related to so many different facets. It related to so many different people. It's not just designers and model and stylists. It has its workers, farmers, herders, and then scientists and the innovators and et cetera, et cetera. So and then it's also not just human stories. The whole ecology, the whole nature, the whole animals, plants, and microbes and everything. So actually, if you really want to do a fashion media well, there's so many stories to tell. It shouldn't just be focused on this commodity. But as you say, it's so tied in and more than before with all the whole brand advertising systems. So all they do is kind of really just have to follow the brands' merchandising seasons and then their marketing strategies. And then, but of course, now we have more and more independent social medias, and we are all new kind of activism, journalists, bloggers, influencers that are coming out, and then which are more independent from the kind of overall total system or the old kind of symbiotic way. So they can have different kind of influences, which I hope.
And Chloe, what kind of media do you think is the most powerful, and what role should it play? What do you look at?
I feel like another person to ask this question, because in our experience, when people hear about our work and hear about the realities that exist on the ground and want to document or follow it, there's always some friction, because to Shaway's point, people are holding on to an idea of how to reach a consumer, how to reach a person. And so when it comes to filming and when it comes to engaging the community, there's always a friction, because sometimes they feel like it's not authentic in terms of they are not here to really report what it is, but have an agenda or have a narrative they are trying to produce, because maybe it's going to sell more, or it's going to get more attention, or maybe it's going to create a bit of an uproar. I feel personally, when I look at it, there's a disconnect in terms of reporting on what happens on the ground, at least with our work, and what is reported in the global north. But there's been some instances where we've succeeded in getting the narrative across, which I think I have to commend. It's just, for me, with media, it's just working with the people on the ground and trying to listen and trying to understand the kind of narratives that exists in the community and how to amplify that, as opposed to having a pre-recorded one idea coming in and then being really uncompromising on that.
I mean, if you were going to involve influencers, if you were going to reach out to, a world that maybe is not as familiar with what you're doing, or not there to kind of expose the reality on the ground, but rather to, sell a mode of behavior, who would you think would be most effective, and how would you talk to them?
That's a really good one. I like to think that I like to reach young people like myself who are starting to understand how, for example, the supply chain works, how there are many facets, and how from the beginning of the supply chain to the end, there are many exploitations, and they're trying to figure out what kind of part they can play to making things better. For example, Brecht took a stand. I would like to see someone like Brecht, someone in Accra, someone anywhere in the world who wants to do something, maybe has a huge following and can reach a lot of people, and is ready to sit with us and ready to talk and have conversations with the community that we work with, and really come up with a way to reach people and show them the reality on the ground.
I mean, Brett, talking about that, how do you mediate between, the sort of the branded world, the TV world, and the people who are now your followers? How many followers do you have, by the way?
Just under 80,000.
All right. So that's a lot of people you can speak to. So how do you balance those two, different imperatives, and how do you kind of make them talk to each other?
I think it's wise to like connect the two worlds, and in one way you have to make it digestible and easy to understand and engage in, but at the same time you have to be informative and factual and come across proper. So usually for me, I feel like people can resonate better with other people, and so usually my messaging, whether I'm talking about clothing or end of life solutions, I always try to connect them with other people. And so that might be a farmer at the start of a supply chain end, or it might be someone at the other end where, a recycling process or something like that. So for me, connecting people with people is definitely something that is a good way to get that audience. It's like those nice Netflix shows that are on a really niche topic, but are somehow really digestible and easy to engage with. And that's kind of how you have to make the content, because it's how you reach audiences that are really large.
Can you give me an actual, a specific example of one story you did like that or post you did like that?
There's a business around like knitwear, for example, and making people firstly understand what a polyester is, and that it's plastic, it comes from oil. And so then you can educate people about knitwear and where that comes from an animal, and that animal has to be farmed by a person. And so in the cases with like merino wool, for example, or cashmere, there's a person who relies and depends on that as a livelihood. And so if we're discarding that quickly, it means that we have to make more of it more quickly. And so that farmer's livelihood depends on how long and how much we look after our clothing, depends on how much, we can communicate that this is a natural fiber and someone else depends on it. The same as like farmers on cotton farms, for example, and teaching people about organic and non-organic cotton. At the other end of that, of what like a t-shirt that you own, there is ultimately a farmer who has to make a decision whether he has a big yield and uses non-organic cotton, or he's struggling with using pesticides and insecticides, what that means for his livelihood and his family, droughts as well, and other climate related disasters, what that means for a person, rather than, I've got this t-shirt from the shop and once I'm done with it, it just disappears. It's adding the connection between, each end of the supply chain rather than just your ownership of a garment.
And Shaway, we hear lots and lots of stories about how important influencers are in Asia and how much they really are the kind of conduit to behavior for consumers, especially younger consumers. And so how do you, when you're talking to brands, connect them to people you think are, helping to kind of provide responsible messages? Does it matter?
Yes, of course, it does matters. And I think the influencers, I can speak from China. There are a lot of influencers or whatever, but I think my point is we need to educate the influencer first. So last year I did a workshop together with Karen. So I gathered 25 top fashion influencers together. We did a workshop about what is biodiversity. What does that has to do with fashion industry? Because I think a lot of influencers, they do have the influence, but they don't have enough knowledge, but they are curious. So they would like to have someone who understand where they're coming from, but also explain the fact to them. Like, what is climate change? What is biodiversity? What is carbon emission? What has that to do with the beautiful clothes or ugly clothes you're wearing? And then once they know, they can find a way to digest it and to talk to their millions of followers. So that's what I choose to do, because a lot of times even brands, they want to find influencers, especially in China. We don't have, actually it's very hard to know any influencer who are really kind of promoting sustainability in fashion. It's not because they don't want to, but maybe they don't know how to, and maybe there's no enough information and surroundings and resources around them. Because we do have some Chinese influencers who are talking about sustainability, but I realize most of them live in UK or Paris or New York, because it's so much easier to show this is a lifestyle, to find people to have a conversation with, to find designers who are doing that. But if you are in China, or I think the majority of Asian countries, you don't really have such an environment. So it's very hard to naturally become an influencer promoting sustainability.
And do you see an actual change in the messaging that the influencers will sort of disseminate to their followers after they go through trainings like the one you just talked about on biodiversity?
Well, absolutely, yeah. But the question is how consistent, how often, right? Because I think, like, yes, as I said, if you don't have like this kind of material support of what you're talking about, you can talk it once or twice, and of course people in general have this kind of awareness about like we need to care about the environment. The climate crisis is real, and especially like in China, it's kind of national awareness, and also sustainable fashion is something like we should all talk about. But then but if you don't have like actual practice, whatever, like you might say it once or twice, it's just like a fashion magazine, like every April is kind of Earth Month, or every January all the Vogue do a sustainable issues, and then for the rest of the time it's something else. Then I don't really see that's so too effective. But I think actually the other way you can do is actually, I think that's also the thing to the whole overall fashion industry. Like actually don't just navel gazing at fashion industry itself. You can work with the other industries. And then especially when we talk about sustainability, of course, like fashion is so related to science, chemistries, and agriculturals and design, and then so on and so forth. And I think in terms of like in the area like lifestyle, outdoors, or traveling, there's so much more sustainability influence than in the fashion industry. So why just don't work with them and then just mix all the message all together?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I mean, one of the things that I find really interesting, which I would like to hear both Chloe and Brett talk about also, is this idea that, there's a kind of truism that like Gen Z is going to save us, and Gen Z likes to thrift, and Gen Z is much more aware of sustainable fashion than any other generation, and on and on and on. But Gen Z is also clearly the biggest consumer base for a lot of the worst kinds of fast fashion, whether it's Shein or Pretty Little Things or Mischief or any of these like very sort of race to the bottom brands. So how do you guys think about this? I mean, where does this sort of cohort of consumers come down, and how do you convert maybe one group to the other? Chloe, do you want to start?
Of course. So sometime I think last month, an food influencer, posted something on Twitter, and a friend of mine reached out. It's like, have you seen this? I hadn't been on Twitter because Twitter can be a bit, yeah. And so I saw it and I was really shocked, but I wasn't, to a sense, because we've been seeing this coming in the past, year or two. She posted about, I think, fast fashion brands finding pathways to be able to ship in bulk so they can directly reach consumers in Accra and Ghana in general, which we had an idea was coming. It was only going to be a matter of time because we're in a global world, like we're connected online. People are consuming so much advertising and so many communications aligned, with fast fashion. And so it was only a matter of time. And to see that, for me, really stoked the fire to get up and say something, because we have an existing culture where we share clothing, where clothing is passed down, where some of my best pieces came from my mom and my grandmother. And so to see that come in and sort of like deteriorate the social fabric and the kind of ideas and the kind of like relationships we have with clothing really scared me to the core, because as you said, Gen Zs are the biggest market for these fast fashion brands. And in Ghana, the majority of the population are young people, and they're on social media, and they're on Twitter, and they're on Instagram, and they're sharing information and then, communicating to each other. And so it shook me to the core. And for us, what we could do and what we continue to do is to continue to create that awareness of what's happening in Kantamanto and showing them that the value of Kantamanto and recirculating the social fabric that connects us all as Ghanaians in our culture. When you come down, you realize that when we go to events that are like celebratory, for example, an outdooring or maybe like a birthday party or a celebrating of life, we're adorned in bespoke cultural attire that some of them have been passed down. And to see people gradually move away from that is really shocking. And for us, we want to continue to reinforce that idea of going back to sticking with what already exists and what already works and what already keeps clothing in circulation and will not hurt the environment in any way and is not, like centered on profit or like hitting, targets. It's for us, we continue to bring that home and show young people that the effects of contributing to fast fashion can have implications on their livelihoods and their own environment and their parents and whoever, because we're all connected in shapes and forms.
Mm-hmm. And Brett, how do you feel about this? How do you sort of bridge those two extremes?
I think what you say is really interesting, Vanessa, about Gen Z, because you're right in a sense where Gen Z are the ones who care the most. I've certainly witnessed that on my socials. There's a big community of people who are really knowledgeable and be really quick to call you out on whatever it might be, the claims that you're making and things like that. But at the same time, there's also within that demographic, people who simply do not care or are completely ignorant, whether they choose to be ignorant or whether they're just ignorant or not, they definitely exist. And so what we have is two large groups at each polar end, and then a big chasm in the middle of, kind of people who just are unaware or don't really know. But what I think we have with Gen Z is, especially now, they're super impressionable. So for me, I wasn't really impressionable to all of this until I was in my mid-20s, but they're right there now. And they're also the demographic that are going to consume the most amount of media out of any generation ever. And so this is the point where, one, they're going to be pumped with loads and loads of marketing. I think there's fast fashion brands that just plan to keep doubling their outputs to accommodate for Gen Z. But at the same time, you've got, the rise in searches for secondhand clothing and pre-loved and recycled and all of those things. You've also got a wave of designers coming through, especially through London, who are now using dead stock and upcycling from past collections. And that, again, is that generation coming through that are going to shape, the fashion industry going into the next few years. So it's going to be a really interesting balance. I do believe this is a good point now where we need to, really impress Gen Z and educate and, just make sure that content is out there for them to consume. But I also do think they're going to be swayed by, hopefully more legislation, hopefully legislation around marketing and how people market towards that consumer. And legislation will hopefully help shape the way fashion brands work as well. So again, we can impress them and help educate and make them care, but I also think they might be made to care legally too. And of course, for that generation, the targets around net zero and climate change targets are the ones that are going to really impact them, are going to be really, they're going to be coming of like, they're going to have a lot of buying power by the time those targets are here. So again, that's also going to affect the way they live.
Well, actually, here's a question for all of you. Do you think influencers should be regulated and their communication should be regulated?
I have so much to say about it.
Yeah. Come on, bring it on. Say your piece.
I honestly think that influencers have evaded all responsibility for so long. Whether it's the claims that they make in helping brands greenwash, the amount of marketing that they're simply allowed to do consistently. They could do like 20 adverts a day, not be legislated at all. It doesn't matter what they say. You're also turning a platform that is about connecting people into a shopping platform. So I could just be consuming media, just watching friends, funny videos, whatever. And I'm about 3 seconds away from putting something in a basket and buying it. And it's not a shopping platform, but it's turned into one because influencers have leveraged the platform to make money. And so ultimately we're just constantly shopping. But, influencers have evaded all responsibility with that. So I think, and there's also so many pardons that go around for not marketing adverts as adverts when they are. People get off on this so much more now. And so, yeah, I think there needs to be really strict legislation about how much, how, and yeah, just the language that influencers use online. I think it's ridiculous.
Chloe, what would you add to that?
Influencers have a lot of power, and to what we're discussing earlier on, and some of the points that you made, Brett, is that they're reaching a demographic that is like constantly like interacting with each other and sharing information, and they're reaching them. And so for me, it's regulating and making sure that, for example, because I know a lot of young people are on Twitter or on Instagram or other social platforms and are shopping and then consuming all of this information. Again, it's deteriorating the values that they came up with from their backgrounds, and gradually shifting them to something dangerous that would have enormous implications on other communities that probably they have no idea about. Case in point, in Kantamanto, in the women who carry in Kantamanto, how a single item you bought with ASOS, Boohoo, whatever it is, fast fashion brand it is, ends up being used as a weapon on these women. And so it's never as simple as it's my money, it's my platform, oh, it's my choice. It's not simple. It has to be regulated. People need to be sanctioned if they go overboard, because I would love to see it. And I would also like to see an alternative where influencers take up the mantle and say, this is how you upcycle your piece. This is how you fix a button. This is how you do this. This is how you keep clothes in recirculation. Because it's easy for you to say, don't do something and not provide an alternative. And that could really make it easy for people to fall back to old habits. And I think using influencing and using our platforms to try and change and get people to stick to what already is good, I think it's really important.
And Shaway, what's your feeling about regulation and influencing?
Well, I think, of course, influencers should be regulated, because here we call influencers sell media. Well, as long as you're media, you should be regulated as any other media. But however, it's very ironically for me to say that, because where I'm coming from, all media, including influencers, are heavily regulated or censored. So in that case, it's very hard to say should they be regulated or not, right? They should be regulated for the right things, but then and not for the wrong things.
Last question for each of you, although I feel like we've just started. We could keep going on for another hour or so. Where is the line between being too preachy, which I think can be a risk when we're talking about sustainable fashion, right? That you become so worthy, particularly when you're communicating on social platforms, that people kind of tune out, and, pulling them in and getting your followers to really understand why, like, it's great to wear something more than once and it's cool. It's not, it's not that you're trying to be better, but you're actually doing something that is worthy of emulation because it's like super neat. What do you think, Brett? How do you balance those two things?
Yeah, it's certainly something that it's been a learning process for me coming from last summer. I think one, you have to find a balance between, occasionally you have to be really vocal, and occasionally I will shame a brand or shame a big organization, because I think that's the way that you get those to move. But at the same time,
who did you shame?
Oh, I'm shamed like Boohoo Group, their owner, Pretty Little Thing, factories. Yeah, it used to be worse. I've actually toned it down a little bit now. But I think I'll reserve that for some bigger organizations and big corporations. And at the same time, I think it's important to empower people. And so, first of all, we have to be relatable, because one of the worst things that I used to get was that I'm self-righteous and elitist, preaching sustainable fashion. And so you need to be relatable, and you have to empower people to change rather than shaming people, because that just doesn't work. If you try and shame a person, the first thing they'll do is say, all right, forget it, I don't want to know. And online, you have to engage them and empower them and say, I used to do that too, and I have fast fashion items in my wardrobe, but now I try and get as much use out of them as possible. And, that's what you could be doing too, or lend them to friends so they don't have to buy any more stuff. There has to be balance, but yeah, like being preachy. This is also why I don't really, sometimes I'll run away from the word activist, because people immediately have this vision in their minds of what an activist is.
Mm-hmm. And Chloe, are you happy with the term activist?
I'm not.
What would you call yourself?
I struggle with that, because to Brett's point, there's an idea of what an activist does, and that is hard to shake when people talk about activists. And so I just call myself a designer and a researcher and try to see if it works. But it's an evolution for me. I'm constantly trying to coin a term, because I'm in a really, I'm in a niche. I'm in a particular part of the ecosystem or industry that people still don't know about or still don't engage with. And so maybe my role is not inexistent yet. Maybe I am creating a space for myself, so to speak. And to add on regulations and to add on influencing, I feel like it's really important for me to bring it home. That is never as simple as I'm standing on an online platform, which is also ironic, because it may come across as preachy. But for me, it's really important that you make it as personable as possible and try to understand that the people you're speaking with are intelligent and are aware and are like, they have the building blocks to be able to tell if you're being preachy or if you're being really authentic. And so for me, it's about speaking from where it worked for you and where it caused the littlest or simplest change in your community or in your environment. I think people connect with that when it's happened for you personally and are able to connect with you on an emotional or psychological level, on a deeper level, as opposed to being like words throwing words out or trying to be confrontational or trying to be preachy and trying to be as standoffish. So for me, it's about being as personable as you can master and as open as you can possibly be and be as authentic to yourself and where you're placed in the supply chain and share that. I think that truth speaks for itself. It's spoken for me and the people I've been able to, get to even have a conversation about changing their ways.
You're also cool, Chloe, as well. So like knowing people that like, saying I'm a designer and a researcher is much cooler than saying I'm an activist, because it immediately people think, oh, I have to be a rebel and have to rebel against all this other stuff to be an activist. And people can't really envision that pathway. Whereas if you say, yeah, I'm just, I'm a designer and a researcher, it's a cool job and a cool title. And people are like, oh yeah, I want to do that too.
Thanks.
And Shaway, I mean, in your experience, does shaming brands, does that work, or is that something that produces like the opposite reaction for them? What is the best way for people to communicate with the brands?
I don't really think shaming brands works, but I think pointed out, to be able to know what it is, but then it's not necessarily shaming, because we also all have to understand the whole sustainability issue is such a complicated issue. Sometimes people fail to do it. It's not because they want to greenwash, and it's because there's other issues you need to be concerned, or there's like a technology is not there yet, or there's whatever. So my approach and what I like is always trying to understand more and discover more and to share that, and people can make their own judgment. But of course, if you see something obviously they are not doing it and they should be doing, you can point it out. But I think I wouldn't put even though we always say we need to do like ethical fashions, but I think ethical fashion and to use a moral high point to point it at the other people's are totally two different things.
Okay, final words from each of you on what you would like to see in this space with influencers and brands. Shaway?
What I'd like to see in this space is actually, I think we need more creativity in the whole climate narratives. And that's actually my personal interests are right now, because as I said, there's so many stories you can tell in terms of so many facts and so many arguments you can have in this kind of, not only just climate or sustainability, and it could be go on beyond like ecology, the whole systems and etc. So there's so many things to say, but you need to say it as we all kind of more or less come from the creative industry. So you need to say it in a more creative way to make people find it's interesting, it's acceptable, it's exciting, it's contagious, it's compassion. And I think I haven't seen so many of that yet. So it's not just storytelling. I think they will still have a storytelling. We have documentaries where people, but how do you show all this new world, a new system you discover in a more creative way, and then make it to be more contagious and more communicative for more people. So that's what I would like to see more and then do more.
Mm-hmm. And Brett and Chloe, would you agree that that's actually the biggest challenge for you next, is to how to tell these stories in the most creative, engaging ways?
Yeah, definitely. There's a need for more creativity, and particularly for me, I think more transparency and more responsibility from like everyone within the industry, but particularly people online and the creators.
Mm-hmm. And Chloe?
Yes, I would like to see more transparency and openness, because from where we stand in the secondhand supply chain, it's really tricky to know where the power lies and where the wealth is, where the money, the profits are, and how people are managing the waste. We only see the influx of like shipment coming in. Money does not follow it. And so it's a group of amazing people, craft people artisans, businessmen and women, creative people coming together to try and find creative ways of recirculating clothing pieces shipped from the global north. So I would love to see more transparency in the supply chain. I'd also like to see us talk about EPR policies and how we need to find a way to manage waste where wherever the waste or the piece or the textile clothing ends up, money follows it to be able to keep it in circulation. Because what we see in Kantamanto is they're doing their best with the very minimum offered to them. Imagine the kind of things they could do with all the resources is made available to them. I'd love to see conversations where we are a bit more open and have the policy match the reality on the ground and have conversations with the people who are managing the waste and people who are in the front lines of fashion waste crisis and push them and give them the resources to continue to do the work. Because arguably, Kantamanto is recirculating so much clothing that I'm still shocked that people cannot focus on that and then give it the accolades that it needs to be able to, do the work.
Okay, well, listen, something to watch for, something to act on. And thank you all so much for your time and attention. And I hope everyone who is watching has found that as engrossing and thought-provoking as I have, and that we keep the discussion going long into the future. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Vanessa and all of our speakers for a thought-provoking conversation. This session will be available for replay on the New York Times YouTube channel and in the article page linked in the chat. Check out the Climate Forward website for more information about our upcoming events in the series and sign up for updates for the in-person moments taking place in New York City and Sharm el-Sheikh. Thank you again, and I hope to see you soon.